All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It is pleased to be here with you on this Monday, August 11th, for our second meeting of the Joint Federal Action Oversight Committee. As has been the case, every day brings a new set of circumstances and surprises to this state of Maryland, not the least of which, unfortunately, we start today with abhorrent comments from the federal administration about our very own city. And I have to say that we're going to be talking about a number of critical issues. We have the comptroller here with us today. We're going to be talking about immigration enforcement. But I would be remiss if I did not start the conversation today of just deep, deep sorrow and frustration and frankly, anger about what we are seeing what is being said about a great American city. And a number of other great American cities that are doing remarkable work, hard work every single day to build opportunities for people. And so I am unbelievably frustrated. I think that we all work incredibly hard here in the state of Maryland to give more families more opportunity, no matter what neighborhood they are living in. And what we need is partnership and not the total chaos and demeaning that we have seen. And so that's not where we're gonna focus our attention today. We have to focus on the big issues of pocketbooks and where Maryland families are and the worries they have about the layoffs and the impact of the federal government here in Maryland and what's happening and what we're seeing. And so we're very fortunate to have the comptroller here with us, whose office produced a substantial report. And so we look forward to hearing that, and then we'll pause for questions and then take up a conversation around immigration. So, Madam Speaker, if there's if anything to add before we jump in. Sorry.
Had to unmute myself. No, I think you said it fully. So let's get going.
Let's do it. All right. Thank you. First up, Madam Comptroller.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Senate President Ferguson, Madam Speaker, members of the committee. It's great to be on here with you today and really challenging times. I am going to be introducing and talking about the work that we are doing on the economic front, and then turning it over to my colleague, our Deputy Comptroller, Ben Siegel. And today, I'm going to discuss the impact of some of the policies, but mostly I'm going to focus on the report that we have produced, which is the first in a series of reports that we'll put out around the impact of the federal government on Maryland's economy. So that's the first caveat. Like, we're sharing data and perspectives with you today that are based on the data that we have at hand now and that we've analyzed. Data collection is obviously not static. This report looks backwards at what was and what we have had going with the federal government. But my agency is continuing to look in the present and even the future at what is right now. And of course, our revenue estimates team on what will be. So we'll talk to you today about sort of what was the relationship and the impact the federal government has had on Maryland. But we look forward in the coming month to share data on what's coming. So because what is happening now is that, Maryland is really under economic assault from Washington, and the numbers are really staggering. Whether it's budget reconciliation bill, tariffs, or more, there's so much happening every day. But the first step is really to quantify how these various changes will impact Maryland's economy. To do that, to take that step, we have to start with where we are now. And of course, you all know Maryland has enjoyed a close, mutually beneficial, symbiotic relationship with the federal government. We have benefited from the high concentration of federal jobs and significant investment in the form of contracts, grants to Maryland businesses, nonprofits, research that supports our economy, and of course, jobs. In exchange, we provide an educated workforce, infrastructure to support agency operations, and to help the federal government run. So this summer, we released a report in partnership with the University of Maryland Robert H. Smith School of Business that quantifies that relationship for the very first time. The report focuses on federal government spending and jobs in Maryland prior to the second Trump administration. So at a high level, we have found that an estimated 230,000 Maryland residents were employed by the federal government during the last fiscal year. And that federal jobs in Maryland represented 6% of the state's overall jobs, but 10% overall of our wages. Additionally, the federal government funneled more than $114 billion in grants, contracts, and direct payments into the state. All of that together, the bottom line number was $150 billion a year if we factor in wage and retirement income. So we also know, of course, here in Maryland, losses at the federal level are adding up, really threatening our middle class. The Maryland Department of Labor recorded an estimated net loss of 8,500 jobs overall in June alone, with a loss of 3,500 jobs from the federal government. And that's actually the largest single month drop in federal government positions in Maryland in 3 decades. We've lost about 13,000 jobs at the federal level since DOGE came into action in January, which has now surpassed the federal positions lost during a previous challenging time in the state, which was, if you all remember, sequestration several years ago. So our policy division is working with University of Maryland researchers on a follow-up report and a tool that will help explore the direct impacts of federal government layoffs and spending cuts on the state, which we expect will be available in the next few weeks or month. So our Deputy Comptroller, Ben Siegel, will walk us through the details of the report and what is coming as well. But I did want to also, because I've gotten a lot of questions about this, talk to you a little bit more about what our Bureau of Revenue Estimates is doing with regard to analyzing the data and the changes through the big bill, the one big bill that was passed. You can call it whatever you want, I guess. Because we have in statute a requirement to do a 60-day report, we call it, which analyzes data. So our director of the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, Robert Rearman, and his team are diligently looking at a whole range of data points available to them for signs. So they're looking at all of the provisions in that bill. So they're drafting their analysis. They will look at the changes to the Internal Revenue Code and the impact of those changes on state revenue and on various classes and types of taxpayers. The Joint Committee on Taxation, which is a federal body, sort of identifies those initial provisions, and our BRE team goes in to analyze it. There are over 100 provisions right now that they're sorting through, and they will determine sort of what will affect federal AGI, how that will then flow through to the state. And in some places, there may be automatic decoupling, or there may be places where the state and the General Assembly want in the next General Assembly session to decouple or to stay coupled. So we're excited that will be coming out, or I'm looking forward to at least providing that data to you all in early September. So that's where we are. We have this big report we just did, future reports coming out, and then the 60-day report on the big bill's revenue changes will be coming out in early September as well. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Comptroller Ben Siegel, who has a short PowerPoint presentation to walk you all through the report that we did. But thanks so much.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller.
Great. Thank you, Madam Comptroller. Good afternoon, everyone. Ben Siegel, Deputy Comptroller for Policy, Public Works, and Investment. I see we got the slide deck up on the screen. I just have a few slides that I wanted to walk through with you all, which is kind of a high-level summary of the key findings in the report that we put out in June, as the Comptroller mentioned, in partnership with the Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland. And I have Matt, I think, driving us here. So why don't we jump to the next slide? Great. Thank you, Matt. So as Brooke noted, and just a quick recap, so we've been working with the Business School at University of Maryland since the beginning of the year on a couple of different outputs that we will be releasing this year. to help us better understand the impact of these changes at the federal level. And so the kind of three pieces, as Brooke noted, first is this baseline report, which we put out in June, and that's what I'm going to focus the next few slides on. We're walking through some of the key findings from that with you all. Then secondly, we're going to be putting out a second mini report in the next couple weeks on a couple of case studies of scenarios that we have seen already take place or announced and will be taking place. So for example, the impact of the elimination of USAID. How does that affect Maryland workers, residents, businesses? We're going to have a little case study on that. We are also looking at impacts that have already taken place or been announced at HHS, which is an incredibly important agency, as all of you know, to the state of Maryland, given all of the jobs, research contracts, grants in the state. And then the third piece of this project is that we're going to be releasing an interactive tool using the Tableau platform that the public will be able to use to run various scenarios. So the idea behind this tool is that anyone from the public can access the tool via our website, and they'll be able to run specific scenarios. Say, what happens if HHS cuts 15% of their contracts out of NIH or out of FDA? What is that going to mean in terms of direct economic impact and spending in Maryland? And we view this tool as something that can be very useful to our partners within the state, to you and your offices, to our partners at the county level who are trying to understand, impacts of various scenarios that have either taken place or are being talked about, as well as our partners in the nonprofit and business communities who rely on contracts, who rely on grants to understand how these changes, may impact them. And to be clear, obviously, we're talking primarily cuts, but there are going to be examples where there might be increases, especially in the case of Department of Defense. We expect to see increased contracts and spending there. And, the increases that we're likely to see at Homeland Security, while that will be across the country, a lot of those headquarter jobs are held by Maryland residents, and some of those contracts are located in the state as well. So we'll see that. So let's jump to the next slide. And just a few slides here. And what I'm going to focus on is the baseline report that, again, we released in June. As the comptroller noted, this is the first time that we've done a report like this for the state of Maryland, although I will say that a number of years ago, back in 2010, DLS with Teresa Tazinski and Robert Rehrman did put out a report on the impact of federal spending in Maryland. And while the data sources have all changed, this report does have a lot of similarities to that one from 15 years ago in terms of kind of what variables we're looking at. And of course, the numbers are way larger now than they were 15 years ago. But just to reiterate what Brooke had noted about the total spending in Maryland annually from the most recent years period is we're talking $150 billion coming to the state. And that's across four main categories: income, which is inclusive of both wage and retirement income. You can see the amounts there. And then contracts, grants, and direct payments. The contract spending here, $46 billion, is for federal contracts for work that is performed in Maryland. Doesn't necessarily mean that all $46 billion are going to Maryland-based firms, although very much of that is. But these are for contracts that are leaded and performed in Maryland. Grants are defined as grant awards to nonprofit organizations or state governments or local governments in Maryland. So that's all money that stays in Maryland. And then direct payments are payments made directly to individuals or to businesses. A big chunk of this is Social Security, veterans benefits, and the like. What I do want to point out here, and kind of what this baseline report really speaks to, is our exposure as a state when it comes to spending and investment from Maryland. And looking at the rest of the country, we are not very different, especially when you talk about grants and direct payments, right? Every state in the country relies on grants, direct payments. Maryland is kind of in the middle of the pack there, if you will, in terms of per capita and spending coming in on grants and direct payments. But it's those other three categories where we do have a lot of exposure. So contracts, Maryland is among one of the top states in terms of federal contracting, as we're all well aware. For example, we are the fifth largest state in terms of defense contract spending, even though we are the 18th largest state population-wise. And then, of course, wage and retirement income, and especially wage income. We've got, among the most federal jobs in the country located here, and we have the second highest wages just behind DC. So these are obviously very important for us to be aware of and to plan around. So if we jump to the next slide, I'm going to do a couple slides here on jobs and a couple slides on the spending and provide a little bit more information on some of the key agencies we are most exposed to and some of the activity at the county level. So in terms of jobs, we wanted to kind of, with this report, really clearly, as best we could with available data, quantify the difference between the federal government jobs located in Maryland and the federal government workers who live in Maryland, but maybe work in DC or in Northern Virginia or somewhere else, because it's a very important distinction. Should also note here, when we're talking about federal government jobs, these are the W-2 employees for federal agencies. So not included in here would be federal contractors, right? So individuals who, work for a third-party company, but then are contracted out to work with federal agencies. They are not included here. They get quantified in the contracts category. Also not included here are a number of the highly classified positions that we just don't have data on and are not reported to the federal data surveys and sources. So that includes many of the jobs, say at Fort Meade, jobs within the NSA, classified jobs. And the estimate is that there's several thousand, upwards of, maybe 3,000 to 5,000 of these jobs in Maryland. They are not included here. DoD civilian jobs are. So we are including all of the jobs at the various military bases across the state, but active duty military personnel are not included in these numbers. So I just want to be clear on that, because there is a lot of a lot of caveats to what goes into these numbers. So the key kind of comparisons here. So the second column after the list of the states is the number of jobs. So this is the BLS quarterly census data. This is kind of the key gold standard of counting jobs, government jobs category. And as you can see, in our entire region, we have about 538,000 of these jobs. In Maryland alone, there's about a little shy of 160,000. So these are federal government jobs located in Maryland, or based out of Maryland, obviously, with people working remote. That's where the office is. So you can see we're just behind Virginia and DC there. But when you look at the federal workers, and that's the next column over, we are looking now at where Maryland residents who work for the federal government, where their jobs are located. And this is something cool that the University of Maryland team built by combining different data sources. So they modeled the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics data with commuting pattern data from the Census Bureau. And what this data shows is where they live, about 230,000 Maryland residents work for the federal government. So about 80% of the Maryland federal government jobs are held by Marylanders. About 12% of Virginia's federal government jobs are held by Marylanders, and a very large percentage, about 40% of DC federal government jobs are held by Marylanders. So an important kind of item to keep in mind. A final piece I'll just note, not on this slide, if we just look at the raw W-2 data that we have with our administrative tax data, last year, or tax year 23, we saw about 260,000 individual W-2s coming into our databases. So that means that at any point over the course of the year, there were 260,000 Marylanders who had at least some income as employees within the federal government. The reason that the number here for number of Maryland residents is not 260,000 is that it's based on these quarterly jobs data, and then it gets annualized, so it's a little bit less. And in many cases, those 260,000 might be two people who had the same job at different times in the year. So if we jump to the next slide. Just quickly, just to show a couple of key indicators about kind of what the jobs in Maryland, what federal government jobs in Maryland look like compared to federal government jobs across the US. The most important point to make here is that federal government jobs in Maryland are high paying. On average, federal jobs in Maryland pay about $125,000. That's compared to about $75,000 of our private sector jobs, a $50,000 difference, which is the largest in the region. And then as you can see, the red bars represent the percentage of income levels for jobs in Maryland, and then the blue bars are jobs across the rest of the country that are federal government jobs. And you can see at the higher end of the scales, the 150,000, even going up to 180,000, there's large percentages of those Maryland government jobs paying at that level. Obviously, kind of the key takeaway and point for us here is that when we lose federal government jobs in the state, we are losing high-paying jobs, which are important contributions to our withholding tax and revenue streams. Jump to the next slide, just a couple more here. This slide has a couple of charts that provide a breakdown of the other categories of spending. So not looking at income and jobs, but here we're looking at contracts, direct payments, and grants. So looking at the past 10 years worth of data, which is this top chart, what you see here is that the contracts are represented in the dark blue. The direct payments, which again are those Social Security, veterans benefits payments, subsidies payments to individuals, to companies, is the dotted blue and white bar. And then the green and white bar are the grants. And kind of key takeaway here that you can see is just the growth in federal spending over the past decade. We've gone from about $60 billion in 2015 to close to $115 billion in the most recent fiscal year. What you'll also notice is that in the bottom chart, I know it's a little hard to see, but just to summarize it, while we've seen growth in all categories of contracts, direct payments, and grants, where we've seen more growth, kind of the most growth has been in grants. So while overall among the three different streams, grants are the smallest, we've seen the most growth in grants. A lot of that was driven in recent years by ARPA, and then most recently by Inflation Reduction Act and by infrastructure spending. A lot of that money for grants is coming into, especially from the Inflation Reduction Act, into Maryland. Now, in many cases, those are grants going to large nonprofit organizations that are located in Maryland. A lot of that money might end up going across the country. So it's not necessarily all exposure for just our state. So if we jump to the next slide, I've got two more here. Apologies for the busyness here, but we have shared these slides around so folks can take a look at them, and I'll just walk through the high level. We're now going to look at a breakdown of the jobs and spending, all of the data from the report, at both the agency level and then at the county level. So this slide shows the agency level, and just kind of a key point to make here is that second column is showing three different numbers. So we're showing the wage income by agency, then we're showing the number of jobs located in Maryland for that agency, and then we're showing the number of employees who are Maryland residents. So for example, in that first row for HHS, what this would translate to is that on the most recent annual data, we had about $5.6 billion in wages coming into Maryland from HHS jobs. There were 40,000 HHS jobs located in the state of Maryland. And just as a sidebar, that's about half of all HHS jobs across the country are located in Maryland. As folks know, we're the headquarters for NIH, FDA, CMS, all those jobs are in Maryland. And then 34,000, an estimated 34,000 Maryland residents work for HHS. And that's kind of how that breaks down. And then the next columns over show you the contracts awarded by HHS going into Maryland, and then the grants and direct payments. Kind of key takeaways here is that when we talk about federal government, we're really talking about our exposure being concentrated around a handful of agencies. Again, we know this, right, from our obviously awareness in the state and our counties, but it's useful to see the data here that when you look at HHS, Social Security Administration, Department of Defense, and VA, that represents upwards of about 65% of federal government spending in Maryland when we talk about the different categories of income, contracts, grants, and direct payments. Under the black bar are listed some other agencies that have key exposure in Maryland, either through jobs or workers or contracts and grants. And just to call out, again, as we know, Commerce has a very big footprint in Maryland, with the headquarters of NIST, other offices. Many Marylanders work for Treasury and for Homeland Security. More Marylanders work for those agencies than there are jobs located in Maryland. And then as you can see down the list, other agencies where we have large exposure: DOJ, USDA, state, and NASA. Obviously, there was just an announcement last week about the planned closure of the large research center for USDA that will have a big impact on Maryland. We jump to the final slide. This now takes the same data as we were just looking at, but looks at it from the standpoint of counties. And again, this is stuff that we all know, right? But again, just kind of seeing it quantified, is important. So when we look at our counties and exposure to federal government, it's obviously kind of the county surrounding DC, where we've got our largest exposure. Montgomery County, especially, about 27% of all federal spending is going into Montgomery County through wages, contracts, grants, direct payments. And then if you include Prince George's, Anne Arundel, Howard, we're talking about, upwards of, 65, 70% of spending. And obviously other counties, that are close and up there and have a large percentage of money coming in: Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Harford County, obviously Aberdeen Proving Grounds, Frederick, Fort Detrick, they play large roles there. And then our southern Maryland counties of St. Mary's, Charles, and Calvert, while the numbers aren't necessarily as large as, say, Montgomery and Prince George's County, the percentages are significant. And just to provide one example from Charles County that we had included in the report, when you look at all of the income coming into Charles County residents, so that includes, income for all residents, not just federal government employees, but all residents in the county, 29% of income coming into Charles County is from the federal government. 29%, almost 30%, 3 out of every $10 is federal government, either wage income or retirement income going into Charles County. So while the numbers aren't as large overall, the percentages are significant. Similar levels, not as high as Charles, but you see similar levels with St. Mary's and Calvert and the like. So that's my final slide. We will share this with you. I just want to make kind of one final point with this in terms of, what we view as the utilization of this report, because obviously we have a lot of, partners and colleagues throughout the state who are doing a lot of analysis on trying to understand, what these impacts are going to look like. We felt from our office's perspective, and the comptroller felt strongly that, we should have resources that are accessible and available to the public, right? To our business community, to the nonprofit community, to individuals, so that people can have access to data to help understand the impact of the federal government and to be able to quantify it. We view this report and then the tool that we'll be putting out as a resource that can be used by our partners at the county as they look to do some of their own budget analysis or revenue estimate. And while this project certainly in no way, shape, or form kind of replaces what the Bureau of Revenue Estimates is doing. It is one of many resources that they will use to help with their forecasting. Similarly, we view that as something that, other partners from DLS and DBM can also use as a resource to, help identify, how some of these changes are going to impact our economy and direct spending. The final point I just want to note is that this has been a really great partnership with the University of Maryland. We are working under the leadership of Professor Liu Yang at the university. She is a finance professor within the business school. She runs the school's federal statistical data center. So her and her team are experts on all of the federal data sets that were used to compile this report. And they're currently working hard on doing the interactive tool that we'll be putting out soon. And then we are talking to them about down the road, potentially doing some additional analysis that can bring in some of the more indirect impacts, right? Because what this work is looking at is just the direct impacts, right? So we are not looking at, say, what happens when, there are cuts to federal jobs in Charles County. How is that going to affect, the food services industry and indirect economic impacts? But obviously, we know, those are very real as well. And so that would be something in the future for us to want to get a better understanding of and quantify, some of those larger economic impacts. So with that, we're happy to follow up with folks. We have been in conversations with some folks already, in the General Assembly, but happy to do follow-up briefings, answer any questions here. And obviously, we're always available to answer any questions you guys have. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Comptroller and Madam Comptroller. Are there any questions from members? Yes, Chairman Feldman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hey, Ben, just kind of a couple of things. It's one thing to talk about the direct impact loss of federal jobs. It's another thing if somebody loses a federal job and they just get another job in the private sector in Maryland. And so I guess, and also I think the demographic breakdown, I don't know if you've got that kind of detail, but that becomes pretty interesting. I guess the question I had, and this maybe goes back to the comptroller's report about the stagnant economy and young folks moving to other places. Are we going to be able to track by maybe Social Security number these loss of federal workers, W-2 workers, when we get to next November, a full tax season, to know if those folks are still in Maryland, they just got private sector jobs, or they've transitioned to another state, and if so, where? I think that would be, again, looking back and looking at the direct impact of a federal loss of a job is one thing. If they left the state, that's a whole category, and so I just put that out there.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. You are absolutely correct. We have done some roundtables to get some qualitative data with most of these workers, or with some of these workers, and they all want to stay in Maryland, right? They are trying to find, most of them are fairly well established. They have kids in schools, they own their homes. So they are trying to stay in Maryland. And I think you're right. The question is, what will the private sector be able to absorb? And how will the private sector grow to absorb more of these federal employees? I think, there are examples from sequestration where folks were laid off, but then those same services needed to be performed. They were just contracted out. And so folks who once worked in the federal government ended up working for contractors, or starting their own contracting firms. Right now, it's just too soon for us to know how much of that will happen and how many of these folks will be able to find either state jobs, local government jobs, or private sector jobs. But yes, to your question of can we see who's leaving the state? Yes, we do track the numbers of folks leaving the state, and we do update that I think annually. And so we could look back. It might not be next year, it might be a year after that, or it might be a combination of both, to see if there is a trend of folks who are leaving. And we won't, I think it would probably take a yeoman's work to dig in on which person was receiving the federal, was withholding from this person was federal versus state, but we can definitely see in the aggregate the number of people leaving.
The theory of finding that is one thing. I didn't know terms of realistically capacity-wise,
Yeah, I don't want to.
will ever be able to do that.
I totally understand what you're asking, and it's a really good question. I would want to go back and talk to our BRE team and to Ben and Andy and others about what is actually possible at the sort of minutia individual level. But it's certainly we're already seeing, we will see soon in future BRE reports, you will see as well, federal wages, we can track them going down. We will be able to track those going down. So, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President.
You. Additional questions? Seeing none,
Thanks,
we
everyone.
thank you, Madam Comptroller. Thank you, Deputy Comptroller Siegel, and we appreciate your time today, and we will certainly stay in touch as this progresses forward.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your work.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
All right, I believe we have our next panel. I just want to double check to make sure that I see them on. There we go. Excellent. We are pleased today to be joined by Kamal Asaheb, Senior Advisor and Director of Immigrant Affairs for the Governor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and Adam Kirshner, Senior Assistant Attorney General of the Office of Attorney General, here to present information and data about what we are seeing around immigration enforcement and the many of the negative impacts that we have experienced thus far. Mr. Asaheb, I believe we are starting with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I will speak to a bit around the policy changes that we have seen. There have been many on immigration from the federal government over the past few months, and then touch on some impacts in areas that, to the extent that we've been able to discern them, and I assume our colleague Adam Kirchner from the Attorney General's office could speak to some of the litigation that's underway. So on the immigration side, I'll talk about 4 areas. 1, enforcement. 2, the legal immigration system and changes there. And then 3, including visa changes, and then 3, some of the changes underway relating to access to government programs. On the enforcement side, I think some of the big changes that we've seen are, I think, first and foremost, increases in at-large enforcement, including through the deployment of agents outside of DHS, DEA, ATF, FBI. That's one area in which I think we've seen really an unprecedented change, really more boots on the ground, fundamentally. The second area is the federal government's conditioning of different funding streams on certain expectations of engagement on immigration enforcement on the part of the grantee, including grantees that are states and localities. And Adam, I'm sure much of that is under subject to litigation. Adam will speak to that much more deeply. And then we've also seen changes, the introduction of different new types of enforcement tactics. For example, coordinated action between ICE attorneys and ICE agents to terminate deportation cases of individuals who are going through the process, so that those individuals could be amenable to quick deportation. We've seen, the redetention of individuals who have, been released, as a result of prior deportation cases. And we've seen, a more aggressive form of leveraging of other law enforcement capacities, including state and local law enforcement through the 287G program, which nationally has increased about tenfold. The deployment of, the National Guard currently, in 20 states for certain kinds of, immigration-related enforcement functions. And then the last area is the use of data, whether it's collected by the feds, including by the IRS or collected by other entities, including states through the Medicaid program, to help locate individuals of interest to ICE. And again, much of that is under litigation, and Adam, could speak much more deeply to that. The other area that we've seen significant action on the immigration front, again, this is beyond enforcement, is what I would call delegalization, termination of status for people who have been, who are legally here, have work permission to be here. And I would say the most prominent among these, are some of the most significant actions, are, at least the ones with most significant impact for the state of Maryland. Termination of CHNV parole. This is a parole program that is for individuals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, the Haiti TPS program, Honduras TPS, and then one of the two classes of Venezuela TPS. Numbers are really hard to pin down here in terms of impact for the state. I'd say probably in the order of about 10,000 statewide, but I say that with a major caveat, in that there are some overlapping numbers between the CHNV parole population and the TPS populations. And then the parole population is really not, the federal government has never really quite given official data, state level data when it comes to that group. Relatedly, when it comes to changes, lots of changes to the legal immigration program, including changes affecting people's ability to access the legal immigration system, for example, to receive permanent residency based on relationship to a U.S. citizen, family member, making it harder for that to happen. Various visa changes, including ones affecting students, termination of interview waivers, increased scrutiny of certain visa applicants, rollout of these so-called visa bonds starting next week. I think all collectively will decrease the number of individuals who are able to access the legal immigration system, but then also lengthen the process for those who seek it. And then lastly, the last category of changes I'll speak to, and then I'll touch on some of the impacts, again, preliminary, and to the extent that we've been able to discern them, or others have been able to discern them, is eligibility for certain government programs. Two major actions here. One is, the legislation recently enacted, the One Big Beautiful Act. I think, on the whole, will redefine eligibility for certain. Will change eligibility for certain programs by redefining what is a qualified alien, for example, and then a range of agency actions that are subject to currently subject to litigation. I'm sure Adam will speak to that. Change who is eligible for a range of government programs that had not historically been considered public benefits. In terms of impacts, I would say this one is less obvious, but I think is important to highlight. Given the rapidly changing landscape, these are policies being put forth every day. The shifts in what individuals' rights and obligations are just very rapid. So for individuals, and actually not just individuals, but even their employers, for employers of non-citizen, being able to keep up with these changes and keep up in a way so as to stay compliant with the laws is a very serious and significant challenge. Individuals are worker authorized one day, they may not be worker authorized the next day. The visa program rules that say an employer is relying on to bring in their workforce for peak season in the summer, say if they're in the Eastern Shore, or for agricultural work or poultry processing. Those rules are changing rapidly, and all of that is making it hard for not only individuals to comply with the rules, but also for other actors, including employers. So that's number one. Two, in terms of enforcement, we don't have official data yet from the federal government that is granular enough to assess state level impacts. But through FOIAs, there are some researchers who've put out data they've received from the federal government through which we can sort of see some patterns. And some of those data points are the following. From January, from inauguration day to, more or less the end of June, we've seen about 1,500, a little over 1,500 individuals arrested by ICE for immigration enforcement actions. That translates to approximately 11 per day, with a peak of about 25 at some point in mid-June. For context, this is approximately 2.5 times 2024 levels. In terms of the characteristics of the individuals who've been arrested, about 4 in 10 have never been charged or convicted of any offense. About another 2 in 10 have been charged but not convicted of an offense. And then the balance, about 4 in 10, have in fact been charged and convicted of an offense. So you've got sort of basically an equal distribution of experience with the criminal justice system. In fact, in terms of how these individuals were encountered, how these individuals were arrested, again, this is very sensitive. This is not official data, and this is also very sensitive to how ICE is coding their arrests. We know about 100 people. Again, this is about 1,500 arrested statewide, about 100 people arrested through the 287G program, another 300 arrested through what's called the criminal alien program, which is sort of a broader array of methods through which ICE makes in custody arrests. And then about 1,000, more or less the balance, is what ICE calls non-custodial arrests. These are at-large arrests of individuals who, in the broader community. And then the last thing I'll speak to when it comes to impact, and then happy to take questions, I assume, after Adam's presentation. I think we're starting to see preliminary data that in some of the BLS job reports that we are seeing some decreases in foreign-born workforce. And I'm not a BLS data expert. I assume others can delve into this much more than I can. But presumably there would be lopsided impacts on immigrant-dense industries like agriculture, food processing, hospitality, and other services, and construction. What we don't have data yet and I think we'll know more about it in the next coming weeks is enrollment data, both in terms of the K-12, the public school system in particular, and then foreign student enrollment data, which I think will give us will give us some indication as to what the impact is of the various student visa and other visa changes are on the higher education system. With that, Mr. President, I'll stop and hand it off to my colleague Adam, and then happy to take any questions afterwards.
Well, thank you, Mr. Director. I believe we have our Assistant Attorney General, Senior Assistant Attorney General. Do we have Adam available?
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I wanted to get into the litigation matters. Kamal made reference to several of the items that we're litigating. So to just put it in context, I'm from our Federal Accountability Unit here in the Attorney General's office. And so since January, vis-a-vis the federal government, we've brought 34 actions, and we've been involved in close to 60 amicus briefs. Of the 34 actions that we have brought or joined, I would say 7 of them, from my count, relate to immigration in some way. And then many of the amicus ones as well. So including the amicus, I kind of want to put this into 5 boxes, because a lot of them kind of relate to similar items. So the first one box is kind of a box to itself. It's the birthright litigation. So where that case is right now, as I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, were following, went to the Supreme Court on the scope of the remedy. And for the cases brought by the states, the Supreme Court remanded the question on whether nationwide relief was necessary to address the harms that the states identified. There were 2 lawsuits, one led by the state of Washington, another by the state of New Jersey. We were part of the one in the state of New Jersey. This one with the state of Washington, the Ninth Circuit reaffirmed the nationwide injunction. For the one in New Jersey, with the New Jersey led matter, it was remanded to district court for more fact finding. And we, the state of Maryland, put together a declaration from DHS on the harms that the birthright citizenship question would present, or that the executive order presents, as well as the necessary need for nationwide relief. The district court did a further fact finding and affirmed the nationwide injunction, and the matter was just just argued in front of the First Circuit Court of Appeals on both the question on the scope of relief, but also on questions about state standing. So we're awaiting a decision from the First Circuit. The second category I wanted to mention is the one Kamal mentioned, which relates to immigration conditions. There are matters which grants by federal agencies have added conditions, often conditions that have nothing to do with the grants themselves. The 2 areas that we saw this, especially, was the grants from the Department of Homeland Security. Might be related to FEMA grants, for example, with our emergency management, or Department of Transportation with our transportation funding. We've brought suit on both of these matters. The Department of Homeland Security agreed not to go forward with their grants during the briefing on summary judgment, and so that matter is being briefed. There was no emergency motion necessary in that case, and our briefing's ongoing. The U.S. Department of Transportation did continue with those terms. We sought a preliminary injunction successfully, and it was granted. And now we are on a similar track to the Department of Homeland Security on the next stage of the litigation. Both of those matters are still in district court. The next category, also mentioned by Kamal, is these data requests to do immigration enforcement that really undermine these programs and our requests that could implicate Maryland privacy laws or our own sovereign interests, or that these are requests that we have not seen before. And the 2 that are that we've brought litigation over involve SNAP and Medicaid. In the SNAP one, that litigation is ongoing in the district court. In the Medicaid matter, we moved for preliminary injunction, and we had a hearing at the end of last week, I believe Thursday, on that one. So we're awaiting a decision on the preliminary injunction motion. The 4th category I wanted to mention was matters related to immigration status. So there are programs that we operate that undermine the administration of those programs because of checks about immigration status. So one is involving the immigration status related to our elections. We've received a preliminary injunction motion against many aspects of the executive order on the elections executive order, and that's now before the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And then the other one is also that Kamal mentioned is on a series of benefit programs doing immigration checks that under the statute passed in the 1990s called PERORA, that has never previously required such items. And on that one, we are also moving for relief in that case, and briefing is ongoing for a motion for preliminary injunction. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention is amicus briefs. Many of our amicus briefs, we've brought nearly 60 total. A lot of them relate to immigration. It could be related to some of these other items, such that Kamal mentioned about taking away protections for individuals, or scrutiny of individuals related to things like TPS or refugee programs, or other immigrant enforcement. We were part of an amicus effort in what happened in Los Angeles and the National Guard. So there's been a series of immigrant related amicus efforts. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions or provide any further info. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kirshner. Do we have questions? Here's we have some delegates, Madam Speaker. This is in the order that they came up on my screen. Delegate Pippi.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess this just a question for Mr. Kirshner. So, Mr. Kirshner, I think you stated that the Office of the Attorney General has filed at least 34 lawsuits, I'm assuming against the Trump administration. And I'm just wondering if, we spent the first half of this meeting discussing some of the opportunities and what appears to be the deterioration of the partnership between the state and the federal government, which is very important to me. But my question is, do you think the fact that the agency that you work for has filed at least 34 lawsuits against the administration may have any impact on that relationship that we so heavily depend on? For example, it mentioned that a lot of the funding that we are worried about comes from discretionary contracts where people in the federal government have the choice of using Marylanders for those contracts, or they have the choice of using somewhere else. And so just to reiterate the question again, do you think many of the adverse actions that your agency is focused on, which is suing the federal government, has an impact on funding in our state?
I would say that it's been the opposite effect, because the matter is that we really are identifying the harms that we are hearing from our client agencies. So an example would be at the beginning of this administration, OMB froze had a series of funding freezes that were worth millions and millions of dollars, and we successful obtained a preliminary injunction motion that protected millions of dollars for the state of Maryland. There have been several other examples of successes along that way. So I think that for us, the goal is not to jump into litigation at the first glance, but to really identify the harms that we are hearing from, and to make sure that we are adequately protecting those interests. So I think that for us, it's really an effort to protect the interests of Maryland, and is not to necessarily jump into litigation, but to protect those interests where they are. And I think the success that we have obtained in a series of our cases have done that. With an example, when talking about grants, the OMB funding freeze at the very beginning of the case, at the very beginning of this year, is a case in point, but there have been other similar examples.
Mr. President, just for my follow-up brief up, we talked about the immigration component of Mr. Kirshner's presentation as well. And the last question and the final question, sure, is do you think some of Maryland's sanctuary policies, and maybe some of those policies that you seek to protect by filing suit, has an impact on funding, given the fact that this president has said repeatedly that jurisdictions that continue to operate as sanctuaries will lose funding? So do you think those actions that you've taken on behalf of your agency could result in us losing funding, given some of our sanctuary policies here in Maryland?
I don't think that any of the litigation relates to sanctuary policies that we've been engaged in. I think that the matters that they've come up in specific instances along the lines of what I've identified that go to protecting, funding streams or protecting data. And so we certainly, our interest is kind of taking a case by case analysis in terms of protecting the interests of Maryland.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Majority Leader Moon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This might be a question for Kamal. I just wanted to follow up on the data regarding 287G agreements and get sort of a better understanding again of, what's the time period of which you're looking at data, and exactly how many people was it that have been detained through the local 287G agreements? And then more generally, is this going to be monitored in sort of an ongoing basis, and I think the info that folks would be interested to see is the county breakdowns, whether we have an indication of what these folks are being detained for, were they actually criminals or not, et cetera.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Leader Moon. So the federal government, as I said, has not made publicly available data that gets to this level of granularity, certainly not state level data, and certainly not, method of, basis for arrest or method of encounter. So the data that's out there is gleaned, what I shared is gleaned from essentially, FOIA requests, FOIA data that certain academics are making available online. And so it's a little bit sensitive. This is all a caveat. It's all a little bit sensitive to how ICE codes the data. But when you look at the data from January 20th to the end of June, you see about 1,500 to 1,600 arrests in the state of Maryland. And then when you look, there's a column for sort of, method or, like program, the basis for the arrests. Under that 287G is one category, and it's a little under 100, maybe 96, 96 individuals. As a personal matter, I mean, that's data I'm looking at closely, looking for updates, the next iteration when these academics post the information to see, what else can be gleaned. But this is not data that we have ourselves or is publicly available. We're sort of, piecing it together. And notably, there is not a county breakdown, in that data set, at least as far as I can tell. But as we learn more, details and nuance, happy to share updates with the group.
Chair of Health and Government Operation.
I apologize. I could not make it work. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon, everyone. I have a couple of questions. One of them, if I may, is for Kamal. Does the 4 out of 10 with some conviction include minor traffic infractions?
It does. In fact, if I'm remembering the data correctly, of the, so 6 out of 10 individuals who've been arrested, by ICE don't have any, convictions, and 4 out of 10 don't have any charges at all. And of the 4 of 10 that do have convictions, the most common, most serious offense is a traffic infraction. So it's not only a subset, but it is the largest subset of those with convictions.
Thank you. The other question I have is adding to Leader Moon's question, could you clarify whether the criminal alien program operates? Where does it operate? And is it statewide? And is the 287G program only in a few counties?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. The criminal alien program is really a broad array. I wouldn't even call it, as I understand it, and it could absolutely be uh, being redefined differently under this administration. Um, but as I understood it and as I'm familiar with it, it is a broad array of ways through which ICE partners with local jails. And so that could look like a some sort of understanding as to response to a detainer request. That could look like ICE being in the jails, having a space in the jail. Although I'm not aware of that being the case, that latter model being the case anywhere in the state of Maryland. But it could look a bunch of different ways. In terms of the 287G program, currently, as of the last time I checked, we have 8 jurisdictions, 8 counties in the state that operate under the 287G program. We had 3 prior to inauguration.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, if I may, Madam Speaker, is directed for the other gentleman from the Attorney General's office. And you were asked a question about cuts to the state. Will you agree that during his presidency, Trump has implemented or proposed numerous cuts to different programs such as Medicaid, SNAP, housing assistance for low-income people, energy assistance for low-income people, Department of Justice grants for public safety, granting loans to help students pay their debt, community development grants, and so many other programs? Is that a fair statement? I think it's Mr. Adam.
Thanks for the question. Yes, thanks for the question. I mean, I think there has been to not get into the everything that's been proposed by the administration or what Congress has enacted most recently. I will say from a litigation perspective that there are many of the programs that you identified have been put at risk, and in terms of how Maryland operates these programs and what flows from those programs. And we've litigated several matters related to the various programs that you've identified, and that there are other programs that are at risk, and that we are constantly being aware, keeping a keen eye on what else is at risk for Maryland, and seeing where the harms flow to ensure what needs protection.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Speaker, for the courtesy. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome. Chair Barnes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Delegate Pena-Melnick took a little what I was going to talk about, but I think Delegate Pippy hit the nail on the head, and he's totally right when he talks about Donald Trump is petulant. He acts in a vindictive way. We have not seen him act for the benefit of sort of the citizens of this country. It's really about what Donald Trump wants. And so we have to be, I guess, a little cognizant of that, to Jesse Pippy's point. I mean, I understand Delegate Pippy's sort of thoughts on this, because in his own, I don't think it's district, but his own community in Western Maryland, where we saw really horrific flooding, we've seen no help from the federal government. We've seen Donald Trump do absolutely nothing. And our one congressman from Maryland has said nothing about it, probably for fear of Donald Trump's vindictiveness. But at the end of the day, I do think we have to balance that with fighting for our constituents and their betterment. And so I would just ask you to sort of weigh in on how we balance those things between, Donald Trump's petulance and vindictiveness and our sort of responsibility to fight and stand up for our constituents and their betterment and needs. Thank you.
I believe the question's for me. Do you want me to speak to that?
Yeah.
So what I would say is, where we start with litigation is, what is the harm to Maryland? And that goes to both our legal obligations and the kind of the thought process behind any litigation is for our Article 3 standing is to show harm. And so when we are identifying litigation, we are in close touch with our client agencies. And in almost every lawsuit we have filed declarations from our agency leaders that outlines an extensive list of that harm to both for purposes of standing and often in support of emergency motions of irreparable harm. And so in terms of that balance, it's really the balance of identifying that harm. And if the harm needs protection against that harm, that's where the litigation comes in. It's not necessarily, obviously, it's a lot easier not to bring a lawsuit. And there have been a couple of instances where the Trump administration has reversed course following victories that we have received, or because of other constituencies who have also raised similar concerns that we've raised in litigation, and we've withdrawn preliminary injunction motions when that has happened. We're not here to just litigate for the sake of litigating, I'm happy to follow up with anything else, but basically we're here to identify the harms and to protect against those harms, and that is often in the form of declarations that we are submitting from our agency leaders here within the state of Maryland.
I think that's the right balance. So thank you. Thanks for answering the question.
Okay. All righty. Thank you all for the thoughtful discussion today. And it's clear that our conversations from our conversation listening this afternoon, that federal actions on the economy and immigration are impacting Marylanders every day. While the federal administration may try to divide us, this group is united in finding ways to respond to this moment for the people we serve. So I appreciate everyone's time today, and I look forward to our next meetings. Senate President, do you have anything to add?
No, stay safe, everyone.
Okay. So with that,